We have a few comments here. I've been asked to wrap up the session in a few words. What's being shared here together. So I think one of the important points is that in Brussels we're all very excited, it's very dynamic, we're all motivated, but we should not forget that this is a huge challenge facing us. We have 1,000 of 2,000 passive constructions, but there is still a lot to be done, and this will not be done overnight. Therefore, the whole initiative that was described this morning, all the initiatives that are described, by the way, in this little leaflet standing on the table outside, all these initiatives had, interestingly, very concrete results. Performances, quality buildings, very high performances. But the first advantage is that for the first time, we started speaking about sustainable construction, about passive construction, and all the different ranges of buildings that can be imagined, but also in terms of sustainable construction, in terms of building, in terms of city. And this is new. These subjects didn't used to be brought up. Even in architecture classes, these ideas were not touched upon. It was too practical, too technical. It was not good enough. So it's now a much wider debate. Public stakeholders have their say. So what I remember from Grégoire's presentation is that everyone starts from where they are. In the years 2000, in early 2000s, Brussels wasn't really fast forward, but it worked hard. And starting off doesn't mean to come off with a very sophisticated plan, but instead is to build up a project. And this whole process enabled Brussels to choose the right priorities. As philosophers say, you always start kind of in the middle of something. For example, in the past, some energy bonuses have been granted for photovoltaic panels before checking that the roof is properly insulated. So imagine after a few years, only do things fall into place. Also, all the different contributors showed that this process is building a vision that needs to be shared by all the stakeholders. So the question is, how do you share a vision? It doesn't mean that a intermediary solution should be found, but instead that each stakeholder defends the public good, question of environment, also socio-economic questions of energy poverty. This question has to be raised by public stakeholders. Private sector actors also have their arguments, and therefore this shift was only possible because the argument at the center of the table has so many advantages. The passive has many advantages that slowly was understood by the different stakeholders. So the importance of a collective vision, in a collective vision, the importance of examples, of exchanges, of journeys, of on-the-field experiences, of models, enables you to see a broader picture and not get locked into purely regulatory questions. The only thing that changes now, we mentioned it talking about Hanover, about Brussels, is that thing is speeding up. You have professionals that throughout their career as engineers, as architects, as scientists, saw construction go from 4 centimeters to 8 centimeters of insulation, to make things simple. But it's no longer the case now. It's totally different, and many practices have become obsolete. have become useless. So it's difficult, but it's just like this. What I also remember from what was said this morning is that within this collective learning process, the question of exemplarity slowly, gradually built up, and then it was put forward. And then the question of incentives, so the way to help people to upscale the quality. There were initiatives to do so, but there was also the production of different initiatives, whether be it from architects, from engineers, but also the tenants, the inhabitants, the dwellers that we can learn from feedback, from experiences. Sophie made this very clear, by the way. We need to have circles, learning circles, in order to learn new things. We also need to test all the theory through practice, through experiences of housing, of offices, service spaces, and so on, and to make sure this expertise can be disseminated throughout all the different fields of society. We have several tools that have developed, sometimes in a very structured way. We have a wide offer of technical expertise that has been implemented by Brussels Environment. We have an offer for consultancy, and we also have private initiatives that are supported by public authorities, such as magazines, for example, Passive Life, and so on. And the point is to get out of deadlocks of small issues, but instead to see the broader picture. So I think Brussels has specificities that make it end up the way it is. I'm thinking of its very regional features, which means that a number of competences can be decided upon within its perimeter, within Brussels. But at the same time, there are weaknesses as well in Brussels. For example, its lack of management, of land management that is poor, and means that projects can only be developed in partnership with the private sector. So for a while it slowed down the process, but recently we have noticed that it's picking up. And in crisis situations, there is no longer a light investment about a building for 30 or 40 years, as was the case in the past. Now, the bonus that quality brings, the bonus that sustainable construction brings, really impacts on the way construction is being done nowadays. So this is how we see how to capitalize, how we communicate, but also how we check, how we monitor. Because it's all very good to innovate, but how do you monitor your innovation? How do you look back and check it? Sometimes architects are being reproached for their good intentions. It's like the big buildings that were built in the 60s. You're building a world whose consequences you don't know. So this is a very strong argument that has to be taken on board. It's important to innovate, but you also have to know what within innovation will last. This is crucial. So I will conclude saying that passive is really the line to follow when you build buildings. It has widely mainstreamed thanks to the search for a much global approach in terms of construction, clearly. And also this means more stakeholders have joined in, maybe stakeholders that weren't particularly interested by energy questions. But at the same time, the ambitions are very, very high, and therefore everyone expects a lot, everyone criticizes a lot, and everyone tries to figure out whether it's worth it or not. Because there are many people who want to wait, and we have noticed that today the number of people who wait is going down. People are increasingly joining the BATEX. I'll make a simple comparison. You may know the buildings, housing, and offices of BZ, this micro neighborhood in the south of London. Do you know about this? It's a small neighborhood that was designed in the 2000s in order to reduce the ecological footprint of the inhabitants and divided by 3. So the objective was to really build something that would be sustainable without using more materials, without by changing everything, the way they commute, the way they eat, and so on. So that's 66% of the ecological footprint that was reduced, and obviously they're not there yet. It happens in London. They live quite differently from here, but instead of reaching the 66% rate, they have reached 11%. It could be very disheartening and very negative, but in fact, if you look at the figures, if you look closer, you will see that everything to do with structures, everything to do with buildings, it's all almost passive. Insulation, comfort, ventilation, all of this works at a rate of 80 to 85% as planned. So efficiency is guaranteed when it's built to last. What is lagging behind at BZ is the lifestyle. It's difficult to try and live differently when the transports are what they are, the tourism is what it is, the consumption modes are what they are. This is where they're stuck. So the ambitions today are very high in terms of energy, in terms of eco-construction and so on. But what is important about mainstreaming is also it's important to adapt as well the people, so to make sure they work within this passive environment. So keep the broader picture always and understand why the passive version is not just for experts, is not a wonderful realization by architects. No, it's really a new way to live.